Hello and welcome to another Interp series lecture video. My name is Xavier Liu. I'm one of the Interp coaches at Bellarmine College Prep. And today our video will be an introduction to humorous interpretation, or HI. So first of all, what is HI? Here are some event basics for you. So the goal of HI is to make people laugh. Now we're going to try to accomplish this through several different ways or facets. The first is to have many different characters, accents, and body positions. Each character should have a unique accent and should have a unique body position. The reason why you want more characters in your speech is because you are able to better show off your creativity and show off your skill with more characters. The reason for this is because if you have perhaps 6 or 7 different characters with unique accents and unique body positions for each one of them, it makes your speech a lot more interesting to look at and listen to as compared to perhaps someone who only does one character or 2 characters with different accents and body positions. So you want to have usually around 4 to 8 characters in your speech to make that interesting for your judge to be looking at and for your judge to listen to. Obviously, there is a balance to this, so you don't want to have too many characters. So, like 15 to 20 characters might be too confusing and too much for your judge, and that just might make your judge feel overwhelmed at the number of characters that you have. So you want to aim for anywhere around 4 to 8 different unique characters. Comedic timing. Timing is super duper important in humor. In HI, you're going to have jokes, you're going to have transitions, you're going to have a bunch of noises, right? Perhaps transitions with noises or transitions with jokes, right? So the reason why timing is so important is because you need to be able to land your jokes correctly. You need to be able to sort of time your pauses, time those transitions so that it doesn't look awkward, it doesn't look like you're rushing your speech, and it also doesn't make it seem as if you're slowing down too much and you're just dragging the humor. So making sure that you know where that sweet spot is for your comedic timing is super duper important in HI and actually elevates your humor to make your speech a lot more funnier. Next, your speech will also have lots of dialogue. Whether that's interaction between characters or someone narrating and then going into a particular scene. Having lots more dialogue not only just makes the speech a lot more interesting to listen to, but also makes the case that your speech will your characters actually develop throughout the speech. So what I mean by this is from the start of your piece, perhaps you introduce to us a couple characters, and through that dialogue in your speech, we learn more about your character so that by the time we end your speech, we know a lot more about your character than when we first started. Next, HIs have high energy with complex blocking throughout. Blocking is essentially when you create the surroundings of your speech or create the environment of your speech without using props. So sometimes, for example, if the speech is about someone trying to go into space, right? Perhaps you using your body and using your body language, have a lever, have a bunch of levers in the control room or a bunch of buttons in the control room. Perhaps you're moving through desks in a classroom, in the space or science facility. Perhaps you're on the rocket and you're trying to move through different parts of the space shuttle. So whatever situation you're in, HIs usually have a lot of complex blocking. So where you're constantly moving, where you're transitioning from place to place, etc., etc. HIs are often high energy. Lots of HIs will have competitors or speakers jump around, be on the floor, turning their bodies or contorting their bodies in many different ways. So HI is super, super duper high energy. HIs also have some sort of dramatic plot structure. We'll talk about that later. But as you might have learned in your English class, a dramatic plot structure is sort of a little teaser, an exposition, um, a an inciting incident, which leads us to your rising action, and then to the climax of a speech, which is the most exciting, most intense part of a speech, and then towards the falling action, and then the resolution. Vignettes, which are sort of short stories that can be pieced together, are also okay. But we'll talk more about these two things, the dramatic plot structure and the vignettes, a little bit later in this lecture. So hold on to that for now. So, what are some things that we can look for when finding our HI? First, you're allowed to use books, movies, TV shows, plays, those scripts when finding a script. Um, Anything that is published and in print is legal to use. Bellarmine has a script cave, which is what we have dubbed the debate library. If you ask very nicely, Mr. Langerman will be able to let you into the script cave to have you take a look at the scripts that we have. A lot of scripts that we do have are plays or do come from books. So obviously that is a valid way to look for your script. Feel free to also, jump into your favorite book that you remembered back in elementary school, or perhaps, a favorite young adult novel, right? Next, you want to be looking for that dramatic plot structure. So like I mentioned, some sort of exposition, some sort of inciting incident that leads to a rising action, to the climax, to a falling action, and then to a resolution. Vignettes, again, which are short stories, are okay, though may be a little bit hard to understand, so we need to make sure that we piece the vignettes in ways that are easy, or that make it easy for the judge to understand. Next, jokes or funny lines that make people laugh. You want to be actively looking out for these in your script and in the script that you choose. Couple notes about funny lines or jokes. Remember that a lot of your judges are going to be English second language judges or ESL judges, and are usually parents who are 35 plus, 40 plus, 50 plus in terms of age. So the reason I share this is because what you may find funny may not necessarily be the same as what your parents or what an English second language judge may find funny. So, for example, if you are looking at a script that has a lot of raunchy language, so very sexual language, lots of swear words, while you may find that funny, that may not be a script that is very suitable for HI because parent judges might not find that funny, right? A good example of this is perhaps a funny South Park episode or a funny Family Guy episode, right? There are many things in those episodes that may make us laugh as high school students or as young adults, but may not be funny to an Indian mom at 8:00 in the morning, right? So you want to make sure that we cater our humor towards our audience and towards our judge. Another super important thing when finding a script is making sure that script is easy to understand and relatable. Sherwin and I like to use stupidly relatable as a term. What this, again, essentially means is that you want to be looking for a very easy to understand plot, right? You don't want to have a dramatic plot structure with lots of holes, lots of loops, lots of different and complex ways that characters are moving around. You want to make it the case that that plot and those characters are very easy to understand, almost stupidly easy to understand, that anyone, including an Indian dad who is falling asleep at 8:00 in the morning, can understand, right? You want something that is simple, that is relatable, and that is just easy to understand for anyone of any age group and any ethnicity. You also want to make sure that you have solid characters and effective dialogue. Solid characters, like I mentioned, you want to have characters that help you move through your plot, right? You don't want characters that are stagnant. You don't want characters that confuse your judges. You don't want characters that don't really help move the plot along. So if you have or are including or thinking of including a character in your speech that is just there because they're funny or just there because they just have one line that's really really hilarious, that may not be the best use of your time or best use of that character. Same with effective dialogue. By the end of the script, I want to have known something or learned something about a character, and we do that through making sure that we include effective dialogue in our script. If you're just including a line just because it's funny or for the sake of being funny, that's not necessarily the best reason to include something in your script. You also want to be looking for good blocking or places for good blocking and good tech. Essentially, you want to be able to give yourself opportunities in which you can perhaps show us your creativity, show us your skill, show us your body language, move your body in ways that will impress a judge or will make a judge laugh, right? So you want to make sure that you have those opportunities in your script. If your script is really just you talking to the audience or you just standing still and transitioning between scenes, that's not very funny. You want to make sure that your speech is high energy, is again has solid characters and has effective dialogue, so that you can build yourself some solid foundation for some good blocking and some good blocking tech. Some rules of HI. First, you need to make sure that you have a new script every year. So you're not allowed to use scripts that you've used in the past as your script for this year. Your script must also be printed, published, and single-sourced. For single-sourced, what I effectively mean by this is, or what I essentially mean by this is that you're not allowed to combine two different scripts. So for example, if you really liked these two books and you wanted to combine them together, that's not allowed. You're also not allowed to combine episodes within a specific TV series. So for example, if you wanted to do Brooklyn Nine-Nine as your HI, you can't combine the pilot episode and episode 2 into one HI. You have to choose one or the other. Your HI will also have many characters. You, as the speaker, may also play characters of any gender or any sex. So, for example, if you self-identify as a male and there's a female character that you need to play in your script, you're more than welcome to perhaps adopt more feminine body language or adopt a higher pitched voice to play that specific character, and vice versa, right? So if you identify as a female and you want to and you need to play a male character, you can have more masculine body language, you could have a deeper voice, etc., etc. You must also have a written introduction. This introduction sort of just introduces your speech and is something that you write yourself and insert into your speech. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the structure of an HI section, which is coming up next. But effectively, your written introduction introduces your speech, talks or explains to the judge what the speech is about, as well as tells the judge and the audience the title of your speech and the author of your speech. You are also not allowed to have more than 150 added words, which includes the introduction. Usually these added words help you transition from one scene to the other in your speech and make it a little bit easier for you to perhaps verbally announce transitions, or make it the case that allow you to link characters to each other or link dialogue with each other. Your speech must also be memorized, so you can't bring up a script with you when you go and compete. Your speech may not be over 10 minutes, so you have a 10-minute maximum. And last but not least, you may not use any props in your speech. So again, blocking or creating the environment around you, as well as characters. All of that, you don't have any props with you, so you need to use your creative imagination and use your creativity in ways that allow you to portray a character and portray the surroundings of your characters without using props. So now we're going to talk about the structure of an HI and go over the dramatic plot structure. Usually when you look for your script, or usually when you cut your script and you choose your script, you want to be looking for some sort of like teaser, or you want to establish a little hook that hooks your audience. And that teaser is usually around 45 seconds to a minute and a half long. That teaser usually starts off by introducing your character, provide some sort of surrounding or some sort of setting that the speech is going to be taking place in. And then, like I mentioned just before this slide, you have your introduction. And again, that introduction will essentially introduce your characters and what the speech is about. Usually that introduction is 30 seconds to a minute long. Afterwards, you'll have some sort of exposition. So the exposition is basically where we get to know a little bit more about the characters in your speech. You get to explain who those characters are, what their dislikes and likes are, introduce us to the setting, introduce us to other characters in your speech other than your main characters. That sets us all up for the inciting incident, which is sort of the problem, where the problem is introduced in your speech. Usually you want to have the inciting incident around 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes to about 4 minutes in your 10-minute speech. After the inciting incident, you have a string of rising action. So this could be perhaps 1, 2, or multiple scenes, after which you've introduced the problem. You sort of explain what happens afterwards, right? And those rising action scenes lead us to the climax, which is the most exciting, the most intense part of a scene, or intense part of a script. Usually you want to have your climax around 7 to 7.5 minutes in your script. Afterwards, you will have the falling action. So perhaps a scene, maybe 2 after the big climax of your speech, where, we start moving towards the resolution. And then last but not least, you have the resolution of your speech, which is usually a minute to, or anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, where everything sort of gets tied up and your speech ends. Next, we're going to examine the structure of an HI if it's a vignette. So again, vignettes are sort of short stories where they sort where the short stories get tied together into one cohesive speech. The vignette structured HI starts off very similar to the dramatic plot structure. You're going to have some sort of teaser, which is around 45 seconds to a minute and a half. Afterwards, you're going to have the intro, again, 30 seconds to a minute, where you explain what's going on with your speech, where you talk to your judge and explain what happens, as well as introduce the author and the title of your speech. Then you will have some sort of expository first story. So similar to the exposition, you want to give some sort of background to your characters, right? This comes with the sort of first story. Afterwards, you want to start narrating. So this is when we have this sort of gray area between the first story and the second story. And this gray area, essentially, you are narrating and connecting the expository first story with the second story, which usually has some sort of inciting incident. Then you will have this narration again, which sets up your rising action, which is a third story. So this is perhaps starting to get a little bit more intense. Afterwards, you will have another narration. Could perhaps be a couple lines, or perhaps a transition that you can use a noise transition with, or perhaps adding lines in to your speech, which leads you to a climactic fourth story. So like the climax, this is The fourth story is usually the most exciting, the most dramatic, the most humorous part of a speech, which again ends with some sort of narration into the fifth story, which is the falling action part of a speech. And then again, leads into some narration and then the resolution and closing part of a speech. What vignettes or what HIs structured around vignettes sort of look like, again, is first story, some sort of narration, then second story, some sort of narration, third story, some sort of narration, etc., etc. You are using narration in between the stories to connect your pieces together. Now, what sort of skills are needed for HI? First of all, cutting. You need to make sure that your story makes sense. You piece together whether or not you're using a dramatic plot structure or vignettes, that you piece together something that makes sense to the audience that isn't confusing. Next, you want to make sure that you have emotional variation and control. Facial expressions, emotional portrayal, both super important in HI. You want to make sure that your facial expressions and your body language like really speak volumes to your characters and into moving the speech along. Next, you want to have very creative blocking tech. HI is tight, fast, and clean. If you look in our skills section of the Interp Videos website, you will have different videos that explain to you how to block and how to effectively block. With HI in particular, it's super important that you have good blocking tech and that you have creative blocking tech, right? If you're just standing there and moving in between characters, not really transitioning in between scenes, judges aren't really going to like that. They're going to have a very hard time giving you a good rank in the round if your blocking isn't very strong or just isn't very solid or just very sloppy. Next, you want to have good reactions in between characters. Because HI involves a lot of dialogue, a lot of interaction in between characters, you want to make sure that each character reacts to what the other character is saying. Next, you want to make sure that you have good characterization, good voices, good accents, good body positions. You want to make sure that each of your characters have unique accents and body positions and voices. If they start blending into each other, that just leads to a lot of confusion with your judge. Next, you want to make sure that you have very high energy. HI is not for someone who just wants to just stand there and not move. Again, like I mentioned with HI, you're going to have folks that are jumping around, moving all throughout the room, lying on the floor, jumping up and down. You're expending lots of energy, and by the end of your speech, you should really be sweating. So with HI, we really need someone, or if you're going to do HI, you really need to be someone who has a lot of high energy. And last but not least, cleanliness. Especially with blocking, especially with what we call popping, which is transitioning in different between different characters, as well as transitions between scenes, transitions between characters, etc. You want to be making sure that your transitions, your blocking, your popping, all of that is super clean. We don't want stuff to be blending into each other. You don't want judges to start getting confused about what is happening within the round. So that concludes it for this Interp video all about HI. If you have any questions, as always, please ask your senior captains, your junior captains, your event leader, as well as your coach, which is me.